in Nixararis, and we are Liberty Blue. We scream about the Rangers so that you can save your voice. That's how deeply we care about you, and we appreciate that you've joined us for the ride. This is episode 38, live on Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube, special trade deadline edition. That's why we are live on Friday at 6 p.m. as opposed to on Monday. Here we are doing a special episode for you because of all the news that transpired earlier this week and earlier today. Full video will be up on our YouTube page at Liberty Blue Podcast, and the audio version will be available wherever you get your podcasts as well. Search Liberty Blue on your favorite podcast platform, and it should be there. Give the show that shiny and illustrious 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It helps the show a lot more than you think it does. At Liberty Blue Pod on Twitter and Instagram, I am at Chelney Andrew, CHELNEY Andrew, alongside Nick Zararis, Nick ZARARIS. Those are our personal Twitter handles to follow as well. Nick, well, no shortage of trade news earlier this week, but kind of a little bit quiet today, huh?
Hey man, there pretty much nobody had cap space left by today, which is the reason you saw all of the depth guys, the little moves, like Kulikov and Nick Bonino, and guys who kind of have a pulse, but are really just going to these places to be ninth forward, sixth defenseman. You saw the first time ever in NHL history, brothers got traded for each other. That happened today. So there's a lot to discuss. The general framework for all of these is winners, losers, but we're also adding the caveat of what the hell, because there's a few teams that fall into the category of what the hell, bro. Like, you do know the deadline was today. Like, they were the kid who showed up to class and goes, there was homework. There's a few teams around the league right now. Like, I don't know if the Canucks know this or not, but JT Miller's no move clause kicks in July 1st. This was the last chance to trade him. So the Canucks are going to have the next 6 years of JT Miller unless he wants to go somewhere else. The Penguins added Mikael Granlund earlier in the week, and he's expensive and okay. He was pretty good. I will say, I watched a few minutes of the Penguins game last night during the Rangers intermissions. He was noticeable. He was a lot better than what they've gotten from guys like Kapanen and Brock McGinn. Just questionable considering like how aggressive the market was, where like if the Penguins just like, gave up 2 draft picks, 3 draft picks, you could have added Chychrun to that team.
Oh, yeah.
You could have, I mean, I think Chychrun would have made a world of difference, but where do you want to start?
I think we have to start with the 2 teams in the Metro that I don't know what they're doing, and that's Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, because they like you take a look at the rest of the division, and you take a the Rangers did some moves, the Devils got a lot stronger. The rest of a lot of the Metro is competitive at the very least, and then you have teams like Philadelphia and Pittsburgh where you go in like what. Like, I'm just like you take a look, especially Philadelphia. At least Pittsburgh, like the Mikael Granlund trade was really bad, and every fan and every writer was vehemently just like, on what universe was that a good idea, bro? Like, what's going on, Ronnie? Like, what's going on up there? But the Flyers, on the other hand, had all of these players that are either on expiring deals or not part of their future. And Chuck Fletcher was like, I'm keeping all of them. Like, that's, I don't, Chuck
Fletcher. Andrew, Brendan and Tony need podcast guests.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, they got the band back together. They got the Watch Your Tone podcast boys back together. Great. Perfect. Terrific. The thing about Philadelphia, and Chuck Fletcher said this in his media availability afterwards, was like, yeah, well, I called teams about JVR and nobody had a significant offer, and I called 17 teams and all these things. Okay, let me tell you something, Chuck. When you have a 31, I think he's 31 or 33.
31-2.
30, yeah, he's somewhere in that range. When you have a 30-plus player who is walking after this season, he's very obviously not going to stay in Philadelphia. He's a UFA. He's still a serviceable player. Like he's a pretty solid player. Like he could have helped a number of teams. He could have helped a number of teams do well, and he could have contributed. He's not a black hole in either zone. He's put up good metrics despite being on an atrocious Flyers team. It's still a decent player. To get nothing to keep him when the Flyers are a million points out of the playoffs, They are in a constant state of dysfunction. This is a team that doesn't know what to do with their roster, how to go about their future. They didn't sell anybody off. They just kind of kept the status quo and also brought in Brendan Lemieux for reasons. So for Chuck Fletcher, like the Flyers, the whole situation with them, at least Pittsburgh, they made a questionable move. They brought in Kulikov for, I think it was Brock McGinn, and that was, I guess, an
It's a
okay
salary
deal.
dump.
Yeah,
It's a salary dump. You get out of McGinn.
for salary reasons, and they, I guess, needed a better defenseman back
He's
there.
a
Like
7. He's the
it's
7th D.
yeah, like it's not the worst trade.
No.
The problem with
I would have
Mikael
liked Nick
Granlund.
Bonino. To be fair, I
Yeah,
would have liked
yeah.
Nick Bonino for the
I
Rangers.
too would have liked Nick Bonino. That was a good trade by them, and they also like didn't give up anything of value to get him, so it was good. It was fine. But the Mikael Granlund trade, you get rid of so much cap, and that's the guy you go for. Also, he makes $5 million. Oh yeah, he's gonna be paid $5 million for the next 3 seasons. Like, why? Of all the players that you could have gotten to really make this a playoff team, you could have. There's so many potential options out there that were either moved to other teams or, in the case of names like JVR, just kind of stayed where they were. There was a lot of options for Pittsburgh to go out and really make this a playoff roster, because right now they're kind of toiling in. One night they look really good, and the next night they get destroyed by a team that they shouldn't get destroyed by. They are they are one of the teams in the NHL right now. So you would think that Ronnie Hextall would take a look, and he looks at his roster and the way he plays, and he goes, you know what, we really got to make some bold moves here to help this team out. Mikael Granlund, cool. How fun paying him?
I'm adding 2 more teams to the tier you just mentioned for the what are you doing?
Vancouver
I would like to
also.
nominate
We could
the Vancouver Vancouver's one of them, and I would also like to nominate the Calgary Flames. Those are the 2 teams I would like to nominate for this category as well. Vancouver giving up a first-round pick for Philip Roenick, who Roenick's fine. He's a solid defenseman. He'll probably play pretty well with Quinn Hughes. But a first-round pick for a guy who's in his mid-20s, who hasn't ever really been a first-pair guy on a good team, when you probably should be looking to shed salary any way you possibly can to kind of orient that team around Quinn Hughes, Pedersen, and Thatcher Demko. And instead, you bring in somebody who's going to need to get a contract taken care of. You're trading away a pick you got from the Islanders, when the entire focus of the Canucks right now should be getting your books in order. They should have tried to find somebody to take Tyler Myers. I'm sure they could have found someone who would have taken him for a 3rd or a 4th round pick.
I don't know about that.
Andrew Rasmus Ristolainen went for a 1st round pick 2 years ago.
I mean, yeah, but that's Chuck Fletcher, the GM who notoriously just did absolutely nothing at the deadline besides add Brendan Lemieux. So I don't know what kind of market there was for Tyler Myers. I know that other teams have watched him play hockey recently, and they understand that he is not very good despite him being tall. So I don't know what kind of market there was for him, but when your GM comes out and says we're not rebuilding despite them being bad and in desperate need of a rebuild, that's bad.
They could have traded Brock Besser. He was linked to a bunch of teams. Connor Garland linked to several teams. Missed opportunity for them to kind of get their books in order, which has been an issue for the team for years, is they've never really had the cap space to go after good players or to retain their own players. They've had to cut losses where they've lost Tanev, they've lost Markstrom, they've lost Troy Stetcher, they've lost quality pieces over the years because they just didn't have the cap space because they've given out bad contracts. For the Flames, who sit, I wrote it down here. They are 5 points back of the second wild card. The team ahead of them has 3 games in hand on them. At some point, somebody in that organization's got to say this isn't working. Like, on paper, the Flames are a good team. Like, they are. They have one of the best top nines in the entire league. They have one of the best lines in the entire league at 5-on-5, and Backlund, Coleman, and Mangiapane. The goaltending has been atrocious all year. You have a player's agent being like, we can't keep doing the same thing over and over again on Twitter. And they traded a depth defenseman who's gotten in a couple times this year for injuries, and a forward who hasn't played in a few weeks for a forward who probably won't play, and a 6th defenseman. if this was your let's get in the playoffs move, it is not. You rearrange deck chairs on the Titanic.
It reminds me sort of. Now, this is not a one-to-one comparison, but this reminds me of back in 2012 when the Rangers' only move was getting John Scott,
Yeah,
and they were like, "Have fun." That's the move. Like it's very reminiscent of that situation where the Calgary Flames very clearly needed more than John Scott on the roster, and yet all they got was John Scott on the roster. Like that, the Calgary Flames right now, they look good on paper, but on the
it's not
ice,
working.
like they're very reminiscent of Pittsburgh in a way. Of like one game, they look like they can do some kind of damage around the league, and then the very next game, they look like an abomination on the ice.
Andrew, I got two crazy stats for you.
Yes.
They haven't won 2 games in a row since the last week of December.
Oh, good.
They haven't won 3 games in a row since the first 3 games of the season.
Great.
And they have lost 23 one-goal games this year.
Yeah, listen, when you see when you're a general manager or a head coach and you take a look at the way this team has been playing all year, and you see, okay, the goaltending has been so bad. the
Yes.
the defense hasn't really been that great, despite there being some solid names on there. The forward lines have been inconsistent. Like Jonathan Huberdeau hasn't had the greatest year
No.
of his career. He's been struggling. When you have a lot of players on your roster that should be playing better than they are, and your response to that, because you're so close to the playoffs, was we're going to do absolutely nothing one way or the other. The problem right now with the Flames is that they are in the 9-13 hell spot.
Yeah.
And if before the wild card, if you remember, back in the ye old days, before 1 through 8 made the playoffs, was the 9-13 spots that you were in limbo. Basically, you weren't good enough to make the playoffs, but you also weren't bad enough to tank. And right now, the Calgary Flames have cemented themselves as stockholders in that 9-13 hell spot because they did absolutely nothing one way or the other. Like, you have to decide, are you going to buy, if you're in that range, if you're so close to a playoff spot, but you're not there yet in terms of your play, if you are losing close games, if things aren't going your way, you have to decide, like Detroit did. Detroit is so close to the playoffs, but they Steve Yzerman saw that this team was not quite good enough, so he sold. And he ultimately, I think he did the right thing. When you take a look at Calgary, they are, by all accounts, not exactly in the same position, because Calgary does have better players and they really shouldn't be, on the up and up. Like they should be better than they are, but points wise, they're in the same spot. You gotta go one way or the other. You gotta say to your team, either I believe in you, and here is my belief in you by acquiring more talent, or this team is not good enough. We have to break it down before things get worse. The Calgary Flames did neither, and because of that, they are stockholders, shareholders, CEOs of the 9-13 hell spot.
Okay. Moving along here to the winners, because a lot of teams did really well this deadline. The Devils, they got the best individual player out of everybody. The Bruins and Leafs both got a ton of quality. The Rangers got high-end talent. Maybe you can argue how high-end that talent is, but they added high-end talent. They got depth in Tyler Mott and Nico Mikkola. They filled holes. The Rangers don't have any holes when everybody is healthy. How everything fits together, they still have to figure that out. Carolina, I could argue, maybe winners, more probably in the loser category. Anyone else you want to throw into this mix for winners before we kind of get deeper into them?
I definitely do want to highlight the New Jersey Devils here, and the Curtis Lazar move for me, like, it's
Solid.
fine. It's a fourth line center. If nothing else, could be good depth for the playoffs. Somebody gets injured, he slides right out in there. He's a solid defensive forward, if nothing else, for them. The New Jersey Devils scare me, man. Like, they legitimately scare me. The one thing that they
And they're going to add
potentially,
Luke Hughes. I don't know if you saw that today or not.
yes,
They're
they
going to
will
add
add
Luke Hughes.
once this college season ends, for sure.
Yeah.
The one thing that they didn't really address, and maybe they don't view it as a problem, but I kind of think it
Goalie?
is their goaltending.
Yeah.
If you can get good chances on their goalies, if you can kind of break through their defense and get chances in the offensive zone, you're gonna win the game. They don't have a Sorokin or a Shesterkin or somebody in there that can make that big save if necessary. They kind of remind me in that sense of the Chicago Blackhawks when they had Corey Crawford, where Corey Crawford he could make the big save occasionally, but you wouldn't classify him as a top 5 goalie
No,
in the NHL. It's very reminiscent of that. But hey, to Chicago's credit, I mean they won cups with Corey Crawford in net, so maybe they're fine with rolling that kind of goalie situation out because the rest of their team is so good. But for Carolina, I texted with a friend of mine who's a Carolina Hurricanes fan, and he doesn't like. We were kind of going back and forth, and essentially I've related them to the David Poile method of management. Of we are good enough to make the playoffs, maybe win a round or two, but we will never ever go for all in. We will never ever do that. We are okay with making the playoffs and
and see what happens.
getting a couple of pieces, maybe smaller additions. Although Gostisbehere and Puljujarvi, for all accounts, are good acquisitions for sure. Don't get me wrong, but the Hurricanes will never acquire Timo Meier. They will never acquire Jacob Chikrin. They will never get that upper echelon talent and go all in because that requires a lot of assets that we are not comfortable with giving up. So we will get the Gostisbehere, the Puljujarvi. We will get those little pieces and see what happens. And the Hurricanes have done that for a few years now, and that hasn't worked out for them, but they're doing it again. Something about insanity being the same thing, that you're doing the same thing over and over again. But you know what? I'm not the general manager of an NHL team, so what do I know? But the David Poile did that for 30 years in Nashville. I don't know if you know this, but David Poile never won a Stanley Cup because he did the same thing for 30 years, every year. And he got to the Cup final once, and he lost, and that was it because he never went all in, and his teams were good. They made the playoffs a bunch, and that was it. Carolina is doing a lot of the same thing right now, and for that they are losers. They got good talent, and they didn't really pay a whole lot. They didn't give up a whole lot to get them, so they're winners in the trades themselves. But as the trade deadline as a whole, they are losers.
I'd agree with you completely on that. As far as Toronto and Boston, these are two teams that clearly identified we're good, but we can get better. The Bruins have one of the best top nines of the salary cap era.
Yeah.
When you are going to play a Tyler Bertuzzi or a Taylor Hall on your third line whenever Hall comes back, assuming he's back for the playoffs, one of those two guys is going to be on your third line. Garnet Hathaway might be on your third line. Garnet Hathaway might be on their fourth line, depending on how things shake out once that roster is fully healthy. They added a top 4 defenseman to a team that already had a good top 4. They have the best goalie tandem in the league. There's a real argument that this is the best roster outside of the Lightning that were over $100 million in actual paid out salaries. There's a real argument this is the best team assembled of the salary cap era.
I would agree. This is a team that is right now, they're breaking records. They are the fastest
team. It's the first week of March, and they have 101 points.
The fastest team in NHL history to reach 100 points. I mean, this team is an absolute unit, and if you aren't afraid of the Bruins, then you are living in fantasy land. This team right now can't lose. They refuse to lose. Linus Ullmark is out here scoring goals. This is a team. They have that much depth scoring that their goaltender's pitching in now. That's where this Bruins team is. And come playoff time, will it change? Can it change? I guess. But right now, you can't look at the Bruins and say they're not the absolute bar none favorites to win the Stanley Cup. The one thing that interests me is the absolute disparity between the gauntlet that is the Eastern Conference versus, by comparison, the cakewalk that is the West. Because the one fear that I have as a fan of a team in the Eastern Conference is that whoever makes it out of the final in the East is going to be dead, exhausted, and half their players are going to be injured, battling major potential problems. And then you have a team in the West that, I don't want to say waltzes into the final, but by comparison, they don't have to fight through this mecha gauntlet that the East is going to be facing here in a couple of weeks. You have a team like the Oilers who could essentially just outscore everybody and make it to the final because Connor McDavid says so. Like, they don't have Timo Meyer and Nico Hischier and Jack Hughes and Dougie Hamilton all on one team to get through. There's no team in the West that is as scary as Boston, as Toronto, as New Jersey, as the Rangers, as Carolina. Like, there's so many scary teams right now in the East. In the West, who is scary? Who is there a team in the Western Conference, Nick, that you are potentially afraid of playing in the Cup final?
If Colorado's healthy, I would not want to play Colorado. If Colorado's healthy, they've got Makar buzzing, Landeskog comes back healthy. That's a scary team. If Vegas, if everyone's healthy, I would not want to play a team where Jack Eichel's buzzing. But other than those two, no. Even Edmonton, their defense, and we'll talk about Ekholm in this segment because that's definitely a clear addressing a need. They have needed a defense-first defenseman on that team that's actually good at defense. No disrespect to Darnell Nurse. They ate the cheese on the 56-game season where he had great numbers and good goals against and goals for because they were playing bad competition, but he's not great defensively, and they have needed a defense-first guy. If they play him with Evan Bouchard, I'm assuming, which they will at home, that's a solid top four. Edmonton will be in okay shape, but their goaltending. Stuart Skinner's a nice story as a rookie. He's been pretty good, but Jack Campbell hasn't been
That's
able to
all-star Stuart Skinner to you, Nick.
Hey, man, he's got a sick mustache. I got to get the
There you
volume
go.
routine.
That's right.
I need to know how him and UC Saros get so much volume on their mustache because their mustaches come in so thick where they got like the fireman mustache where mine doesn't get like that. It doesn't come down and like volumey. It kind of sticks outwards, which is a problem for me.
They got to be adding some kind of product to their facial hair. I don't know. Like, if you take a look at my facial hair, you tell I don't listen. I can't grow anything. Like, if I let it grow out, it becomes a tangled mess of nonsense. I have to keep shaving it just so it looks relatively in check. Like, I can't be doing these things. So I don't know the first thing about like all these, facial hair mooses and all these things. Listen. Yeah. I can barely keep
it
this
together.
That's above my pay grade, Nick. I don't know.
Okay. One last team I wanted to put in this category that I think did pretty well. I would have liked them to add something more, but I want to say Minnesota adding Klingberg to their back end he's legitimately going to be like their fifth or sixth defenseman. He's a pure luxury. They got Jordan Greenway's salary off of the books. That's good for them going forward because they're in cap hell. I think the Wild have a chance of that middle class to make a nice run comparable to what we were just saying with Edmonton because of the way they're built and because the West is so wide open. I also want to say part of the reason the West doesn't have like the clear-cut gauntlet is Vegas has been very injured all year. Calgary is not nearly as good as anyone expected them to be. And what's it called? Who am I drunk? Oh, and Colorado's been injured all year. Yeah. Two of the three best teams in the West have been really injured all year. And the third team the Flames were a 100-point team last year. They had three guys over 100 points, and now they're not going to make the playoffs. They were legitimately in the President's Trophy race through January of last year, and now they're going to miss the playoffs outright. That's part of why it's such a gauntlet. Injuries and one of the better teams just failing expectations.
Yeah, I don't know if I wouldn't necessarily call them winners per se because they got John Klingberg, sure, and if you subscribe to JFresh or see his analytics, you can see just how ridiculously awful John Klingberg is at defense. He's okay to offensively, sure, but as a defenseman, he is one of, if not potentially the worst defenseman in the NHL this year. So that's fun to see. But for the Wild, they traded Jordan Greenway to Buffalo. They got a couple of depth pieces, in Oscar Sundqvist and Gustav Nyquist. Nyquist is injured right now, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. So by all accounts, they got one depth defenseman and a fifth defenseman that is good on the power play. Is that enough to really move the needle for them in the West? Now, if you take a look at the other moves that were made specifically in the Western Conference, you might say yes, but They were
I was
good.
waiting for Winnipeg to make a move. I really thought that if there was ever a year to go for it, like
Yeah.
you have no idea if Luc Dubois is coming back. You have no idea what Scheifele and Blake Wheeler's futures look like. You don't know if you're ever going to get a top 3 goalie in the league season again from Hellebuck. If there was ever a year to just throw caution to the wind and try and ride the best goalie in the league to the Cup final, this was the year for them. And they added Vlad Nemesnikov.
Well, they got Nito Niederreiter earlier on in the league, so
Yeah,
that was
that's a
good.
solid ad, but
It's not
they
an
were a team
yeah.
that needed to make a splash.
It's
They
not
were a
enough.
team, yeah.
You take a look at a team like the Winnipeg Jets and you go, okay, well they've lost five out of the last 6. They haven't been playing well, but if it like the team is good and the West sucks.
Yes.
You're in the playoffs. But you could potentially be the LA Kings of of 2023 of just get in and
Yeah.
just go. All you have to do is get in, and then it doesn't. And then just keep playing your game, and you could go straight to the Cup final because of how weak the West is compared to the absolute Coliseum fire that is the Eastern Conference right now. Like anybody in the West could go on that LA Kings-esque run and make it to the Cup final and play a depleted and injured and tired East team and could potentially win the Stanley Cup just because their road was easier than the East team. And again, like I'm not here to put asterisks on anybody's Cup win if that happens. That's not what this is about. But if you just take a look at the talent discrepancy right now, the East has added 75,000 top players to their rosters, and everybody's all in the East. There isn't one team in the Western Conference that's all in. Like everybody kind of added like a couple of pieces here and there, but then there's no real like juggernaut in the Western Conference. So the Winnipeg Jets like really should have done more. They really should have tried to bolster this team as best as they could. So just get as much talent as you can, because like you said, Connor Hellebuyck is having a tremendous year. You have so much top end talent right now that their future is unknown. We don't know what's going to happen. Winnipeg doesn't know what's going to happen. This was the year for them to go for it, and they kind of didn't do that.
So 2 specific examples about what you're referring to, about a really good team losing to an inferior team because they're really dinged up, and very recent history. You only have to go back 2 years for Montreal beating Vegas after Vegas and Colorado played that brutal 6-game series where everybody beat the crap out of each other. And the other one that really sticks out is the year Vegas made the Cup final, their first year in existence, when they played the Jets in the conference finals. The Jets and the Predators played one of the best 7-game series of all time, and the Jets were dead by the time the conference final came around. You think about all of the Ranger teams that had to play first and second round 7-game series, and by the time they get to the conference final against the Devils, against the Lightning, they are absolutely shot. The quicker you advance, the better your chances of going through. It's really hard to win a Stanley Cup having to play 6 and 7 games in every series. Colorado last year, they were able to win their first round series in 5 games. They got a lot. They got 4 extra days on the Flames. Not the Flames, excuse me. They played. I am drawing a terrible blank. Why can't I think of who it was? It was a Canadian team. It was not the Flames because the Flames played the Oilers in the second round, and then the other team in the Western Conference because Colorado, Nashville, Dallas, Calgary. I'm forgetting, but
It doesn't matter. Yeah.
yeah. The point being, it's really easy to get dinged up in the playoffs, and it's why you need 70 and 13 forwards. All right, we got about 10 minutes left before we're going to wrap up. We'll focus on the Rangers last time. This is a Rangers podcast after all. Not about the game yesterday. We'll save more specifics for Monday because I want to go back and watch it, and I want to watch the game on Saturday before I start making any real like sweeping. They should do this with this with that. Because yesterday was kind of like the first day of kindergarten where everybody was anxious and everybody was like, "Oh, the new kid. There's a new kid in class. The new kid," and everybody's trying to be his friend and everybody wants to be with him at recess. And it made yesterday just very weird because it kind of made it seem like Kane was bigger than the game being played, and it kind of came across that way in how they played in the game, but I want to go back, take more detailed notes, pay more attention. But the Rangers went from having a Jimmy Vesey in the top 6 and a Barclay Goodrow in the top 6 to this version of Patrick Kane, this version of Vladimir Tarasenko, and in an ideal world when everyone's healthy, having a fourth line of Tyler Mott, Barkley Goodrow, Jimmy Vesey. That's a pretty good fourth line. When everyone is healthy, that's a pretty solid, I would say, one of the 10 best fourth lines in the entire league. That's good. By adding those guys, like we said when they first added Tarasenko, adding Tarasenko makes two lines better. In theory, adding Kane should make two lines better too, because now there's no question marks. Now there's, well, we're not going to slide Gaudreau or Vesey up now. It's we have Kane, Tarasenko, Kako down the right side. That's it. That's it. There is no Gaudreau and Vesey in the top six, barring injury. Now, because they've kind of backed themselves into this corner, cap space wise, where, like we were talking about, they can't call anyone up the rest of the season
Yeah.
without somebody going on long-term injured reserve. So that's, I believe it's 24 days or 10 games is the requirement to go on LTIR, to use LTIR or an emergency call up. But that gets very tricky in who's allowed to be called up. And right now, they're beat up. They need to get to Saturday. They need nobody to get hurt on Saturday. And then they got 4 days off till their next game. But as far as the deadline itself, I think they got reasonable market value. Kane did them a favor because he only wanted to go there. We said we assumed like a third and a fourth. It ended up being a second and a fourth. Conditional second. I'm not going to be the guy to say I don't think the Rangers are going to win 2 rounds. It's within the realm of possibility. It's a reasonable risk. But they got good. They got really good. They did really good on the Tarasenko and Mikula trade. They did really well on that. And then for Kane, you give him like a B minus, a B. They got a player they think that's going to make them better. Fine. I think they probably gave up a little more than they probably should have, but it's whatever. You're trying to win. That second round pick becoming a first round pick 2 years from now, that pick 2 years from now isn't going to help you realistically because it's this year and then next year's a step back no matter what because you're just not going to have this many guys on the team next year. As far as just the trade values themselves, not the fits, not what's going to be with what, because we still need more evidence before we see. Same ballpark as far as estimations?
Yeah, I mean the Tarasenko trade, they got great value. They got a top 6 player and a defenseman who can play in the NHL that isn't Ben Harper. So by all accounts, like that was a win, and they really gave up a whole lot to get those 2 players.
And they got a bad contract out of here too.
Yeah, they that they did as well. The thing about the Patrick Kane thing, and I tweeted this out when it happened. I got a little bit of hate for it, but the thing about the that trade in particular is that Chris Drury did not have to give that up to get Patrick Kane. I understand that it doesn't matter. I get that. And I'm not here to pound, to pound my fist on the table and say Chris Drury shouldn't have done that trade because of this conditional pick. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that Patrick Kane only wanted to be a Ranger. He would not have waived his no move for any other team. So why did Chris Drury feel like he had to give up a conditional second round pick that could potentially be a first round pick to get a guy who only wanted to go here? Why? That is my one question, because Chris Drury could have been like, we'll give you a 5th round pick and this tuna sandwich that I'm eating right now. Like, take it or leave it, because either it's like, if you're talking to Kyle to Kyle Davidson, it's like you either get this low pick or you get absolutely nothing. Those are your 2 options. And Kyle Davidson, like by all accounts, also could have been like, nah, like if you're gonna lowball him that badly, then I might as well just keep him, because it's disrespectful that you were going to lowball him like that. And I understand that aspect as well. Making it a conditional first for a guy who only wanted to come to your team, I'm not a huge fan of, but whatever. At this point, it does not only does it not matter, but like I'm not going to split hairs over a conditional pick again. When you get somebody who can offensively change a game like Patrick Kane can, splitting hairs is not going to do you any favors. So okay, sure, fine. And I understand the Rangers right now are shorthanded. K'Andre Miller is still going to be suspended tomorrow. Ryan Lindgren, we don't know if he's going to play. I don't know. He's been injured the last few games. The Rangers defensively look real bad.
Okay, and I want to modify this because I had a lot of people say this. Well, they only have 5 defensemen. When we say they are bad defensively, that includes the forwards. That includes the forwards.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
a lot of people are trying to be like, gotcha. Well, no. I mean,
No.
everybody.
Yeah.
Last night, the kid line was on for 2 against, and the Kane Panarin Trocheck line was on for 2 against. That means they need to play better defensively.
Yeah.
Because you are shorthanded, you know you only have 5D. That means you need the forwards more committed to playing tighter defensively. It means being more risk averse. It means don't force the puck if there's not a play there. It means take the high percentage play that's safer and keep the puck moving as opposed to forcing all these cross seam passes, the neutral zone passes, etc. When you are playing shorthanded, you have to modify how you approach it. And I imagine it's going to take a little time. They've added 2 guys to the top 6. You know they're going to do everything in their power to keep Trocheck in the middle of them and keep the kid line together and keep Zibanejad with Kreider with Tarasenko. I imagine there's no shot. This is the configuration of the 4 lines in 2 weeks. That's just the way. That's not the way Gallant coaches. It's not.
That's
I,
right.
and we'll explore what those different line permutations are when we get there. But one thing, because I can answer a question you asked me on Monday. You asked me on Monday what changed in the 2 weeks between trading for Tarasenko and trading for Patrick Kane. In the Athletic, I read it, I want to say yesterday. The Chicago guys, the 2 guys, they have Lazarus and Powers, wrote in their story that Kane did not did not go to the GM and say trade me until last Friday. And then by Friday, 10 o'clock, we knew, okay, he's going to the Rangers because he only wanted to go to the Rangers. So that's number one. That technically, even though like there had been talks because Kane's agent had been talking to teams about potentially being a landing spot. It wasn't official until what happened last Friday that, okay, he's waiving the no trade. And the other thing, and this is something that irks me, and I agree with you, the GMs in the NHL are way too buddy-buddy with each other. They're
Oh
way
yeah.
too nice. They're not cutthroat enough. I agree with you. Everybody who plays fantasy anything knows if somebody has to get rid of something, make them.
Pennies on the dollar. Pennies. Otherwise, why? Like, if someone comes up to you and says like, "Hey, I need to sell you this thing, and I need the money right now, like right now, and you're the only person I can sell it to you." If the sticker price is let's I'm just making example up. Like if this thing costs $1,000, I'm not offering you $1,000 for sticker price. Like I'm lowballing you, especially because you're like I'm your whole market. Like
Yeah.
the Rangers were Patrick Kane's only market. So paying sticker price for somebody that only wanted to come to your team is excessive,
Okay.
and it
To
didn't
make
really.
addendum. The
Yeah.
Rangers didn't pay sticker price. They
Well,
because the original asking price, they wanted one of the four. They wanted one of
sure.
Hito
Yeah.
Kaka or Lafreniere. He got it way down, and
Yeah.
he doesn't
Yeah.
get credit for negotiating. That is his job. He's supposed to get the best deal he possibly can. A lot of people are very eager to give the GM credit for doing his job. It took him a year and a half to figure out how to do his job. But we can litigate this down the road when we see how this team does. But a lot of people just giving him credit for doing his job. The only landing spot was Kane. Tarasenko, okay, that I could say that was good negotiating. They read the market, they got out in front of it, kind of set the asking price. They got him in here early. They're going to have 20 games of Kane and Tarasenko to figure out what they're going to do with them. As we wrap up here, anything else you want to get in before we say goodnight and call it a weekend?
This is something that I wish the Rangers could have done, and I get it. They would never do this because Barclay Goodrow has hashtag 2 cup rings, and it doesn't. Nothing else matters. I would have loved for them to shop Barclay Goodrow and get a forward in return that can actually play hockey, because he isn't doing much of anything. Like Barclay Goodrow has been scoring more this past season than in previous years, so his numbers are looking relatively okay. But my man's can't defend, and he can't produce much, especially by himself. He's not driving anything, and he, on top of just being a better bottom 6 forward as is, he's not like he's okay. He's okay, but he's getting paid like a solid player that can score you 15, 17 goals a season. That's not Barclay Goodrow. I would have loved for Chris Drury to at least see what's out there for him. I know they wouldn't have done that because they love Goodrow and his cup rings. But ultimately, if the Rangers like really wanted to be a juggernaut team, I would have traded Goodrow, and I would have traded Jacob Trouba, but they're not going to do that either. So like
Turn
my
the Xbox off, Andrew.
yeah. Like my points on this are moot because the Rangers wouldn't do this. But I would have loved to see them do that if only like Jacob Trouba gets paid $8 million he can't defend. So if you use that $11.5 million of caps, can you imagine the kind of team the
They could have had
Rangers could have
Timo Meier.
assembled? They could have had Timo Meier. They could have had Jacob Chikrin. They could have had so many. They could have literally been a juggernaut. But they didn't want to do that, so it's whatever.
All right. On that note, we will call it a week. We will see you guys on Monday. Hope everybody enjoyed the little special treat here. Make sure you're subscribed to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Every Monday, live Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube. Content popping up more. This is busy season. Accountants' busy season is April. Hockey content people's busy season is April and March and May, and hopefully June if everything goes right.
Fingers crossed.
The content will ramp up as the hockey gets more intense. So make sure you're following along on whatever podcast platform, on YouTube, on the socials, at Liberty Blue Pod on Twitter and Instagram. Make sure you're following Andrew and I. Andrew's handle is Chelney Andrew, Chelney Andrew. Mine is Nick Zararis, Nick, Zararis. Make sure to be safe this weekend. Everyone have a good one. The Rangers play Saturday, and then they're off till next Thursday. We'll see you guys on Monday. Enjoy the weekend.